We're introduced here in chapter 1 to a family, just a normal family of husband and wife and 2 sons. The husband's name is Elimelech, and the wife is Naomi, and they have 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. And there's a famine in the land of Jerusalem at the time, land of Israel, and so they leave the land in search of food, and they go to Moab, at least to put it mildly. Israelite men were led astray by Moabite women. If you remember that, there was a whole thing and judgment that was brought because of that. And so because of that, Moabite women were considered of the lowest possible women to marry. And that's what we have in Ruth. So they find themselves in Moab. Perhaps it was wrong for them to go there. We don't know biblically. We're not told the moral decision of their going there. But they went there in search of food, looking for food. And then this family of people, the father, Elimelech, dies. And so now it is Naomi and her 2 sons. Her 2 sons then take Moabite wives, the older being Orpah and the younger being Ruth, which, again, probably not good, but here we are. They probably sinned in doing so, but here we are. Then the 2 sons died. Okay, so Naomi's husband has died. Naomi's 2 sons then die. So now what we're left with is Naomi and her 2 daughters-in-law. And Naomi is going to go back to her hometown. No reason to stay in this place anymore in Moab. The famine is over, and she is without husband, without sons. So they head back to Israel. But before she does that, she goes to her daughters-in-law, who are now really bound to her in a real way. And she says, you guys go back to your father's homes. I have nothing to offer you. Widows were very unlikely to be married unless they were to be married by their family. She said, I have no family to offer you. I have no sons to offer you. If I was to have a son today, are you going to wait till he's grown to marry him? I have nothing that I can do for you. Please go back to your father's home. So Orpah, in tears, in love for her mother-in-law, agrees to do that and goes back to her father's home. Ruth does not do that. Instead delivers the famous line that has brought about modern Christian songs. Look at chapter 1, verse 16. Look at verse 15. So Ruth says, I'm not going. Naomi says, you have to go. Verse 15. Naomi said, see, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. Go like she did. But Ruth said, do not urge me to leave you or to turn away from following you. For where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do so to me. So she shows this sort of unable to be understood, but massive loyalty to Naomi. Saying, I will be yours, I will go with you, I will follow you, I will die wherever you are. Your God will be my God, your people will be my people. This loyalty, a big theme in this book is this sort of loyalty. So they go back to Israel together. Another part of the story is Naomi changes her name, because Naomi means pleasant, something like that. She changes her name to Mara, which means bitter, because she says, God has dealt bitterly with me. Okay, now, again, these are real people. It's often we just read it like it's a story, and it's not. This is a real human who has lost her husband and then both her sons very quickly. And she interprets that as God is treating her poorly. God is bitter with her. God is angry at her, as we often do. God is treating her unkindly for whatever reason. So she changes her name, says, you can't call me pleasant anymore, call me Mara, because God is punishing me. So they go back to Israel. Now, they're in pretty dire straits at this point. Neither one of them have a man to help, to provide, to lead, to take care of them. Neither one of them have a father figure to go back to in the land. They're going to homelessness is where they're basically heading to. And so what they do is they go back to Israel. We don't know where they're staying. But the first day that they can, Naomi sends Ruth out into the barley fields to harvest. And if you remember when we talked about the magnificent laws for the poor in the Old Testament, if the poor wanted to, they were all welcome to come behind those who were harvesting and take whatever fell on the ground. And so she was going to do that. She was going to the fields, the barley fields, to do that. And it just so happened it was the right time of the barley harvest. And it just so happened that this good, righteous, God-fearing man named Boaz was a barley farmer. And it just so happened that Naomi went out to the fields, and it just so happened that she ended up in his portion of this massive field. And then it just so happened that Boaz notices her that day and takes a liking to her. There's a verse that I love. Let's see. Look at verse 4. Behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem, and he said to the reapers, those reaping, "The Lord be with you." They answered, "The Lord bless you." Then Boaz said to his young man who was in charge of the reapers, "Whose young woman is this?" About Ruth. Now, in English it says, "Whose young woman is this?" In Hebrew it says, "Man, who is that?" It doesn't actually say that, but that may have been the idea. It seems to be, it's certainly Boaz taking a liking to Ruth for some reason. Okay, seems she's attractive, he's interested, he's asking about who this woman is that is there reaping. She wouldn't have been the only poor person there, but he takes a particular liking to her. And we have all these sort of odd seeming coincidences that all seem to line together, right? She ends up in this random field by chance. It's Boaz's. And we find out when she gets back home that Boaz is their family's redeemer, is what it's called, or the kinsman redeemer. And what that is, because it's very important in this book, is if a wife lost a husband, then someone in their family would take that wife and children in to take care of them himself. And if applicable, he would marry the widow so that he would care for that widow. He would redeem them. He would purchase, is the idea of redemption, right? It's a financial matter because you're buying the land of that man. And with buying the land of that man, you are taking in those dependents upon him and you're caring for them. Okay, so he's one of the men in their family, in Naomi's family, that was meant to be a kinsman redeemer. And so we find out all this in this one little chapter section where all these coincidences happen, and she meets this man, and this man happens to be Naomi's kinsman redeemer, and all these things just fitting together. So, as all good women do, Naomi and Ruth come up with a plan, figure out a way to move things forward and make sure Boaz knows that Ruth's available, that she is single and ready to mingle. So, I can't believe I said that. All right. So what they do is Naomi says, "Okay, Ruth, here's what you're going to do. You're going to go into where Boaz is sleeping that evening, which was in a barn apparently that he went to sleep in after celebrating the harvest. And she said, you're going to uncover his feet and lay there at his feet." Now, what all this means is it's up in the air, but what most agree, and I think is true, is it was certainly considered improper for a man and a woman, especially an older man and a young woman, to have a private conversation like that. So, what Naomi does is sends Ruth to where he is already asleep, the uncovering of the feet likely being that which would cause him to wake up. Okay, your feet get cold, you wake up. So she wants him to wake up in the middle of the night so they can have a conversation apart from the public, a private conversation about Ruth. So she does that. She goes, lays at his feet. Eventually, he wakes up, notices her there, and they have a conversation about Ruth. Look at verse 9. And he said, verse 8, "At midnight the man was startled and turned over. Behold, a woman lay at his feet. He said, 'Who are you?' And she said, 'I'm Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer.'" That's a reference to asking him to redeem her. Right? Spread your wings over to protect, to take part in the act of redemption. Verse 10, he said, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich." Okay, so Boaz, not young, not apparently naturally desirable. And so he's amazed that Ruth has come to him. She could have gone elsewhere to make a same sort of request, to a younger man perhaps, or to a richer one even, but she has come to this man who she has respected because, and I've skipped over this, but in the fields, Boaz shows her incredible generosity, right? Incredible generosity. Does so much for her. Lets her not only reap behind the reapers, but lets her join in and take part of the first crops with her. So that when she goes back to Naomi, what would have been a normal day's pulling or reaping would have been 2 to 3 measures of weight of barley. She takes home 35, something like that, measures. Massive amount. So much so that you wonder how she carried it. Right? It was so much. I imagine her struggling under the weight of the amount of barley that she had to bring back to her home. Jordan is not in here, so that's good. She would probably rather me imagine her with like one arm in the air holding all of it by herself and just conquering things in life all by herself. But she makes it back after incredible generosity. Boaz invites her in to eat at his table, treats her like a daughter, treats her incredibly kindly, and she doesn't understand why he's doing that. She falls at his feet crying, "Why are you treating me so well?" And so because he treats her this well, she goes to him and asks for this redemption. Okay, continuing verse 11. "Now, my daughter, do not fear. I'll do all for you that you ask. For all my fellow townsmen know that you're a worthy woman. And now it is true that I am a redeemer. Yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight, and in the morning, if he'll redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he's not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I'll redeem you. Lie down until the morning." Okay, so Boaz says, you have a question? That was chapter 3. But I'm out of it now, so we're moving forward. We have this promise of Boaz saying, I will redeem you. But there's someone ahead of me in the line of redemption, in the line of getting the opportunity to buy the land first. We'll have to go to him first. So the next morning, he goes to the gates and he waits for this man to come forward and he says, "Naomi is back. Will you choose to redeem her land and care for her?" he asks him. This man probably thinking, well, Naomi's old. She won't live much longer, so I'm getting the opportunity to buy some land. That's nice. So he says, yes, I'll redeem her. Then Boaz says, oh, by the way, forgot to mention, there's also this young Moabite woman who you would be caring for as well, that you would be marrying. And the man says, I can't do that. You're messing with my inheritance and what I'll be passing on to my descendants if I do that, so I can't do that. So Boaz says, okay, I'll redeem her. So he does that, and they go through that process. He purchases the land, promises to marry Ruth, and all those things. Seems like happily ever after. In the same way that Ruth shows loyalty to Naomi, Boaz shows loyalty to Ruth and to Naomi. At the end of the story, we have, as we do in other stories like Job, we have this massive sort of reversal. Look at verse 13. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer. And may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life, a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who's more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him." Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi," and they named him Obed. Before we get to the last line, which is as significant as any other line, we have this reversal of the beginning. Okay, so just like in Job, think about the story of Job. Job loses everything. In the end of the story, he gets everything back, doubled or more so, right? Except for children. Have some mercy on the wife. But he gets the same amount of children back, and he gets all the wealth back. And just this foreshadowing, this promise of God that C.S. Lewis says that all the evils will be undone in the end. Right, that's where he's pulling this idea from, which I think that's beautiful. That all the wrongs and evils will be undone. That all the suffering and pain will be receive their glory in the end. It's a foreshadowing of the kingdom of heaven in its ultimate form, that Job gets everything undone. Same thing here, where in the beginning of the story, Naomi loses her entire family, loses her offspring, and in the end, she is gaining a new grandchild, becoming his nurse, able to care for him. Ruth gains back the husband that she had lost before. And then the last line, of course, they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now, anyone reading this story for the first time would have gasped at that last line. Right? This whole story, which seems kind of out of nowhere. Who cares, right? Man, this is nice. Nice story in the middle of the Old Testament. Who cares, though? And then at the end, you find out, oh my goodness, this is the grandmother of David, great-grandmother of King David. And is one of the very few women mentioned in the lineage of Jesus, right? So she is in the line of Christ. She's in the one who's Christ is coming through. So we have this story of tragedy which ends in glory, as all tragedies of the people of God will indeed. The most amazing part of the story is what I mentioned earlier, that God is never mentioned by the narrator. We never say that God sent Ruth to the fields, and yet everything worked exactly like it was supposed to work. Everyone went exactly where they were supposed to go, did what they were supposed to do, said what they were supposed to say for the story to progress the way the story was meant to progress. It's obvious that God is at work the entire time. Right? Naomi's tragedy leads her to think that God is punishing her, when in reality, she is part of this story becoming in the lineage of Christ himself, the great-great-grandmother of King David. So all of a sudden these mundane events, which seem like nothing, become of massive significance and are just a part of the greater story of God in the entire world. All the suffering, all the misery, all the pain, working together, woven together. I was having a conversation with Jerry. This was, it was last week, so 7 or 8 days ago. And I was talking about just how if you didn't believe in a sovereign God, how anxious everything would be. We were talking about Mimi and Pop first, and about how Mimi swore she'd never marry a redhead, right? And she did. And we talked about, like, what if she wouldn't have, though? Like, what if she would have kept that word and didn't marry the redhead, right? Not only do Jerry and me not belong in the same family, I don't even exist, right? And then we talked about how my dad was going to LSU to do gymnastics, but then LSU canceled their program, so he transferred to Memphis. But then Memphis canceled their program 2 years in, and so he had to transfer somewhere. And somehow, by some random collocation of events, he ends up at Jacksonville State University from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And there he meets Mom. What if one of those things wouldn't have happened, right? What if LSU wouldn't have canceled it that year? Maybe they canceled it the next year, and then another opportunity is open, and you've gone somewhere else. What if Memphis would have kept their program for another year? Or not had a program in the first place? What if he wouldn't have had some random friend who ended up somehow in Jacksonville, Alabama that was a contact for JSU gymnastics? What if all these tiny little intricate things that had to happen for him to end up at JSU, where he would meet my mom? And Jerry not thinking, Jerry said, yeah, but you still would have met Mom. I said, there would have been no me, right? There is no Renee in this story. Renee doesn't come into existence. If one little thing here or there changes, I don't come into existence. We're never a family. Who knows what happens? And then I've told the story before that I ended up going to Troy University, where I met my wife by a total fluke. I was walking around a career day that the principal at Westbrook made me go to. She said you had to make a lap before you go out to eat. I was just thinking about Wendy's. I was going to get number 5. It was a spicy chicken sandwich with a Coke. It was $5.07. Missed those days. I used to get it all the time. Couldn't wait for the spicy chicken sandwich. So I was going to make my lap, and I was out the door. There was one table left. I was out the door. No one stopped me. And then this rude guy from Troy University steps out in front and says, have you ever considered Troy? And I'm thinking, I can taste the spicy chicken sandwich. It's a phenomenal moment. And this guy's ruined it. But I'm not rude enough. So I went with him, and he told me about Troy and about the scholarship opportunities and all these things. And I was like, well, goodness, maybe this is something. So if that guy doesn't step in front of me, I never think of Troy. And for some reason, this guy has a moment of boldness, steps out in front of me, and I end up at Troy. I meet my wife, and Alanis and Jerry are welcomed into our home, and we have 3 more children, and we're here. And goodness gracious, the anxiety I would have if I didn't believe that God was in control of things, about what if I missed the moment today that would lead to the joy of the future? What if I don't do the thing today? What if me and Pop hadn't? What if all these just little things that have to work together perfectly for me to get to the place where I am? This book is about that, where God says, relax. It isn't up in the air. We're turning pages that the Lord has gracefully and by His goodness written, all the while we do have meaningful free will choices that we must make and that are making, and God's sovereignty and our free will and responsibility running alongside each other from beginning to end in the Bible. Right? We read the book of Ruth and we think, well, what if Ruth's husband wouldn't have died? Right? Because the end of the story is Ruth gets with Boaz, and then King David comes, and then Jesus comes. This is crucial to the story of the Bible. This is crucial to the story of the universe, that Ruth ends up with Boaz. What if Ruth's husband wouldn't have died, right? What if they wouldn't have gone to Moab in the first place? What if they would have gone to a different city when there was a famine? What if she wouldn't have gone back to Boaz, or to this field during the barley harvest? And what if she would have gone to the thousands of other opportune fields she could have gone to instead of this one? What if Boaz was in a bad mood that day? What if he didn't go to the fields? What if he didn't take notice of her or find her attractive? What if he wouldn't have done those things? What if he wouldn't have woken up that night when he uncovered her feet? What if there would have been no Jesus? There would have been no Messiah. There would have been no salvation. You and I would be going to hell if they would have gone to a different city besides Moab, because we would have had no chance of redemption. And we read the Bible and we say, well, of course that's not. Like, of course God had it under control. Of course it was going to happen that way. There was no opportunity for Ruth not to end up with Boaz. It was going to happen that way. Christ was going to come. God was always in control, never needing a moment of anxiety. And of course, our stories are no different than this. Your story is a small story being woven into the great story. And there are no moments, no needs for anxiety. We are turning the pages to see what the Lord has for us. This story beautifully showing this mysterious weaving together of God's sovereignty and our will and human decisions and His will and redemptive purposes in the world. And our story, of course, being the same way. I've used the illustration before, but like in the Chronicles of Narnia, why did Edmund go and see the Queen? Right? Why did he leave his brother and sister and go see the Queen? Well, lots of answers, but you could say, well, because Edmund was jealous of Peter, and he was not happy that his siblings were treated each other better than he was. He was kind of the outcast, and he wanted power his own way, so he went to the Queen. You could also say because C.S. Lewis was writing a beautiful story, and that had to happen for the story to occur that way. Both those are true. The same thing is true of our lives, that you are making real decisions that matter and that change things, and yet you will not thwart the story that God has written from the foundations. And hallelujah for that. I don't remember who said it. I think it's Piper. But a quote that I love, he says, God's always doing 10,000 things in your life, and you might be aware of 3 of them. Right? Isn't that great? God's always doing 10,000 things in your life, and you might be aware of 3 of them. And you probably aren't. If the ones you're aware of, you probably don't know why He's doing that or what He's doing with that thing. But hallelujah, He's always doing far more. A quote from a scholar, he said, you may find yourself in prison, and God may be advancing the gospel among the guards and making the free brothers bold, Philippians 1. You may find yourself with a painful thorn, and God might be making the power of Christ more beautiful in your weakness. You may find yourself with a dead brother that Jesus could have healed, and God may be preparing to show His glory. You may find yourself sold into slavery, accused falsely of sexual abuse, forgotten in a prison cell for a decade, and God might be preparing you to rule a nation. You may wonder why a loved one is left in unbelief so long, and find that God's preparing a picture of patience and a powerful missionary, Paul. You may live in all purity and all humility and truth, only to end rejected and killed, and God might be making a parable of His Son and an extension of His merciful sufferings in yours. You may find the best counselor you've ever known giving foolish advice, and God may be preparing the destruction of your enemy. You may be a sexually pure single person and yet accused of immorality, and God might be preparing you as a virgin blessing in ways no one could dream, Luke 1. You may not be able to sleep and look in a random book, and God might be preparing to shame your arrogant enemy and rescue a condemned people, Esther. You may be shamed and hurt, and God may be confirming your standing as His child and purifying you for the highest inheritance. You may walk through famine, be driven from your homeland, lose your husband and sons, be left desolate and with one foreign daughter-in-law, and God might be making you an ancestor of a king. Who are you to know what's happening in your life? Right? So often we have this mindset of, well, if I could talk to God, I'd have some questions to ask Him. No, you wouldn't. You don't even know what questions to ask. God's always doing 10,000 things. You might be aware of 3 of them. And hallelujah, He's in control of those things. So, Ruth, a story of tragedy and triumph, of death and of birth, of loyalty and of redemption, reminding us that the normal way God works is just as miraculous and sovereign. And a story where we see the mysterious beauty of the weaving together of God's sovereignty and our free will. It's a story of it just so happened when nothing just so happened, right? Nothing has ever just so happened. We see that in this story, and we see it in every detail of our lives as well. God's behind the scenes, plotting for our good, plotting for His glory. Okay, the other big theme I want us to see, which we won't get into today because we don't have time, is this idea of kinsman redeemer. It's a clear foreshadowing of Jesus, that Boaz is the kinsman redeemer of Ruth in the same way that Christ is the kinsman redeemer of us. The same things that Boaz does for Ruth, Christ does for all of us, and that Boaz is a type of Christ in that way, pointing us forward to Christ in all the ways that we've seen. We talked about in our Old Testament series, we've been talking about these crimson threads, D.A. Carson calls them, that you start pulling on, and you keep pulling on it, and it will always pull you to the cross. That there are these threads running from Genesis to Revelation that all take you to the cross. This is one of the clearest ones that we see in the Old Testament, that this crimson thread of the kinsman redeemer, of the family redeemer, the one who purchases back his family to bring them back into His care and love, in the way that He points to Christ. Boaz doing that for his bride in the same way Christ did it for his. All the things. We'll look at that next week, the foreshadowing of Christ in these ways and the Redeemer stuff. Okay, thoughts, comments, statements, remarks, disagreements, dates, additions, omissions, etc. Anything from you guys? Stop a little bit early tonight because I don't want to press on to the next thing. But any thoughts or questions or discussion? Any of those things? Brown. Probably, but that wasn't the way the law intended it. Yeah, and it didn't even necessarily mean marriage. It meant taking into your home and caring for. Normally, in the case of a young widow, it would imply marriage. The best way to take care of a widow is to marry her and produce children, which is what the purpose of marriage and what women in the first in ancient Judaism saw as their life purpose was to produce children and to care for children. And obviously there's truth in that. So, in general, younger women, it was assumed that you were intended to marry them. Yeah. What else? Anything? Thoughts? Anything? Questions?
It's almost like there should be a to be continued there.
Right. Right. Yeah. You just wait.
I
Yeah.
just forgot to put that part in.
That's right. Yeah. That's good. That's good. Yeah, I love how relevant the last lines of the book are, right? And how it changes the whole story. How you see how it fits into the greater story of the cosmos, not just the Bible, the greater story of the entire universe. And ours fits in that story as well. Sometimes it's just less clear. Anything else? Yeah.
I think sometimes too, it's easy for us to get caught up in, a narrow vision of stuff. And if you think about the story of Ruth is taking place during Joshua, Judges, and when you're reading those, it's war and battle, and these people are killing and they're murdering, and it's just war and battle, 10,000 men, and it's just overload if you just read it through about how brutal and barbaric the time was. Yeah. And it's almost like, okay, let's pull out and remind for every one of these men that died, we're going to have this little love story here and remind you that there's 10,000 people killed in this battle. Yeah. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if that's how all three of the men died in this. Yeah, right. They're in the middle of all that. Sure. And it just reminds you that for all these big numbers of violence, there's always a story behind.
Real people, real stories
of someone that's left behind, and a love story, and kind of the softer side.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Yep. Bring back the humanity of these stories, the reality of them. New Calhoun County Superintendent, by the way, he just started today. First day of school. All the schools in the area got fed, and the staff got fed, and their families at home got fed. That was all his idea. Great thing. We're excited about him. Make sure you meet him and thank him.
The churches in the area fed 5,000 people tonight. So in the media, I kept calling it. I said, "It's the feeding of the 5,000."
That's right, baby. We did it.
Appreciate it more than you know.
Yeah, it was wonderful. It was a great day. Anything else?
It's really cool to acknowledge that throughout every story there's something bad happening.
Yeah, there's always beauty, always grace, always redemption, always. Right. Right. And that's we focus on that so much in the Old Testament that it's wrong for us to read the Old Testament as everything that's said here is God giving a thumbs up to it. What it's right to see is God in reality, right, in the real world, and how things work, and that even in sinful people, God is working beauty. Even in sinful people, God is working redemption. Of course, ultimately, but even individually.